Hello everyone, I'm Emma Coleman. I'm Programs Manager at Art Fund, and it's a pleasure to be hosting this panel discussion for our art partners and supporters this evening. In my role, I work closely with colleagues at museums across the UK as they apply to Art Fund for our support. This covers a huge range of activity, as you know, but a lot of my work specifically focuses on curatorial research and expertise and supporting the sector with professional development opportunities, which is really fulfilling to play a part in. Of course, we're only able to support the sector with the backing of our many members and supporters, and it's wonderful to have so many of you here today, and a sincere thank you for making our work possible. In tonight's discussion, we'll be exploring how museums and arts organisations are coming together to address issues of ecology and the environment. We'll discuss how art can prompt discussion, education and engagement around these important subjects, how it can document the natural world and help people benefit from our environment, but also raise awareness of key issues such as climate change. A really important part of our grant giving at Art Fund is to help museums be relevant for their audiences and to address issues of today. We all know well that environmental issues are at the forefront of discussion worldwide, and as someone who works with grant applicants every day, I know that museums are really keen to be a part of that discussion and are seeking support to explore these issues for and with their visitors. The panel tonight will feature speakers joining us from across the UK. Art Fund is delighted to have supported several of the panelists in the important work that they're undertaking. So I will now welcome our panel and ask them to please turn on their cameras. I'm pleased to be joined by Emma Nicolson, Head of Creative Programmes at Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. Francine Hayfron, who is Cultural Park Keeper at the Whitworth Gallery in Manchester. Misha Curson, who is Senior Arts Curator at the Eden Project in Cornwall, and artist Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg. Hi everybody, welcome. It would be really fantastic if you could all introduce yourselves and say a few words about your role and what you do. And I'm going to start with Francine.
Okay, hello and good evening everybody. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Francine Hayfron and I have a wonderful title of the Cultural Park Keeper at the Whitworth Art Gallery in Manchester. So essentially it means I'm responsible for the outdoor programme that happens at the Whitworth. And this was basically launched in around 2015, around with our huge capital redevelopment. And that was very much focused on bringing the indoors out and the outdoors in. And I guess my work sort of focuses around maybe 4 or 5 key areas. So that's about participatory engagement. So focusing on getting people connected to nature. Because as you'll know, we are a gallery that is situated in a very urban part of within Manchester city centre. So there's been a huge focus on getting people reconnected to nature. My work is also focused around health and well-being and being able to help people to improve their health and well-being using the natural asset of the park, which we are situated within. I also do participatory programmes around welly walks, as you can just see in the picture. So again, that's back with getting children focused and engaged with nature. We also do large-scale events, for example, such as the Frost Fair, where we can welcome over 10,000 people to celebrate with us together art and nature. I also present and produce the podcast for the gallery, which is A Walk in the Park. And I also do a lot of work around anti-racism work. I work very heavily on that and looking around decolonising our programme and collections. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Francine. Emma, I'm going to come to you next.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for inviting me this evening. I'm Head of Creative Programmes at the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and have been here now for 2.5 years. Prior to joining the RBG, I was founding director of Atlas Arts on the Isle of Skye. And I think that's where my kind of journey into all things ecology and nature began. Atlas was a venue-less arts organisation that worked with issues around contemporary urgency and rural life, commissioning artists to respond to the kind of local surroundings and concerns that came from our island. A key commission during that time was with cooking sections, and it was their Climavore concept, which is a campaign to transform the way we eat by not so much eating with the traditional seasons, but rather eating according to the climate conditions that we find ourselves in. And their work, Sky Climavore, challenged us to think about how we eat and how that might regenerate our marine environment, such as eating seaweeds and oysters, or growing seaweeds and oysters as an alternative to farmed fish. And as I said, it was this deep engagement with ecology and the climate crisis that led me to move to the Botanic Gardens. Here, I've been tasked with reimagining our arts programme. The Botanics in Edinburgh has a long established arts history, but we wanted to reconnect it to the mission of the gardens. And in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were fortunate enough to be awarded one of the Outset Transformation Awards to turn our beloved gallery, Inverleith House, into Climate House, an institute for ecology at the edge. We were jointly awarded the grant with the Serpentine Gallery, and building on their Back to Earth proposal and general ecology programme, we devised the General Ecology Network, which has generously been supported by the Art Fund. And I will talk more about that later in our conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Emma. Misha, I'm going to pass over to you.
I'm Misha Curson. I'm the Senior Curator at Eden Project and for the Eden International sites. So we're building new sites across the UK, but also on every inhabited continent around the world. And so I lead on the visual art strategy, looking at both curation, commissioning, and working with artists to explore topics of both social and environmental importance. Eden's fundamental mission is to reconnect people with each other and the natural world. And so my role is to look at how we work with artists in order to do that. Prior to Eden, I was the Associate Director at Cast Sculpture Foundation, leading on the commissioning programme there at Cast Sculpture. And then before that, I actually worked more for artists directly within artist studios on the development of commissions. And that's me.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Misha. And finally, Daisy.
Hi, I'm Daisy, or Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, very long name. I'm an artist and I work at the intersection of nature and technology, and I use technology as a way to explore our relationship with the natural world. So in the last few years, I've done things like work on a collaborative piece to bring back the smell of 3 extinct flowers, in a large-scale installation, which you can currently see at the Venice Architecture Biennale, and using machine learning to regenerate the dawn chorus. And I'm now working on a lovely commission, very exciting, scary, huge commission for the Eden Project, where we are creating an algorithmic garden that's an artwork for pollinators rather than an artwork for humans. So we're planting next month a 52-meter garden that is hopefully unlike a normal garden, with every color juxtaposed against each other because different pollinators see different colors, a range of plants that bloom across the year. And the algorithm is created to support the maximum diversity of pollinators. And we're creating a website which will launch at the end of September, where anyone can create their own DIY edition of a garden and download a certificate of authenticity and then potentially plant their garden. And then we're rolling it out to create a network of sister gardens around the world, where we will have this series of artworks for pollinators that are all linked together. So a very ambitious and exciting project, and it's been amazing to be working with Eden on something so crazy.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, all. It's fantastic to learn a little bit more about your practice and about your current roles. And it's great that today we have a really fascinating panel that I think really shows the breadth of our network at Art Fund. As many of you aren't working within a traditional museum or gallery space, but art is still intrinsic to your role. And I think that's the point that I would like to kick off on. So to dive in, Emma and Misha, you both work at organisations that are predominantly known for their environmental focus. I'd love to hear more from both of you about why you feel your creative roles are so important at those organisations. And I'm going to come to Misha first.
I mentioned Eden's missions to reconnect each other to us, to each other and the natural world. And we have an educational program, we have an interpretation program, and they are implicitly factual and evidence-based. But we kind of acknowledge that facts can leave people feeling disempowered and disengaged, and that artists have an agency to provoke, to captivate, to inspire, and to engage people on a more empathetic and spiritual level. And so the art program exists in order to offer a different level, and it's how we bring these interpersonal and intrapersonal reflections to issues of critical social and environmental importance. So yeah, it's how we look to empower that agency of artists, and think about humanity from a holistic perspective. So we're not just brains walking around in bodies, but we're a lot more than that.
Thanks. And Emma, how about you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would completely agree with Misha in that art has this incredible capacity to connect to the emotional side, and I work in an institution that you know, has the largest number of staff are in the scientific wing, and I guess the exciting thing for me is how do we communicate that very complex information in a way, and it is about peeling away the layers through community engagement or education. But amazingly, there's this kind of 60-year history of presenting art at the Botanics in Edinburgh, and so our visitors, I suppose some of them anyway, have become used to that way of viewing the gardens. But it's a vehicle for us to share. The exhibition that we've just launched this weekend is looking at the history of flax. Flax appeared in the seed list of the Botanics 350 years ago, when we began as a physic garden, and Christine Borland has kind of explored that in many ways around the kind of tending of that plant and the medicinal properties and how it's gone on to make linen. So you can see how an artist can really kind of share the story of a plant. That's
yeah, absolutely. That sounds really good. One for the wish list, I think. Thanks, Emma. Francine, as you've noted, the Whitworth is a really unique gallery. It's situated in parkland in the heart of an urban centre in Manchester, which means that you've got an opportunity to engage audiences both across indoor and outdoor spaces. And your role looks at the cultural programme in the outside spaces, but I'd be really interested to hear about how you work with the gallery's curatorial team, and is there sort of a synergy in programming across those two spaces?
Okay, yeah, so there's lots of opportunities to work with the curatorial team, and in so many different ways. So if I think of a few examples, obviously looking at it being exhibition focused, so sometimes there may be an element of the exhibition or maybe a program activity that could take place directly outside and make that connection. But for example, a really good example is we did an exhibition called Parliament of Ghosts with the artist Ibrahim Mahama. And originally, when we first started looking at that show, an element of that show, because it was taking place during the Manchester International Festival, was going to happen outside within the park. So one of the things that would have happened would have been an aircraft that would have come from Ghana that would have been located. That didn't happen anyway in the end, but that's an instance of how our work comes together. But as part of that, I was really fortunate, and thank you very much to the Art Fund as well, who I believe supported us with that, to go to Ghana to visit Ibrahim and the site and to see the aircrafts and all the different elements that were going to come over to Manchester for their exhibition. And that was brilliant. And we created a podcast and a podcast episode to go with that. So there's a lot of synergy there of working together. And for example, we did, I think it might have been 2016 now, we did an exhibition which was a retrospective of Lucian Day, and it was called A Sense of Growth. And obviously we hold a lot of Lucian Day textiles and wallpapers within our collection. And so there was a synergy between that and our horticultural wellbeing group, which I mentioned briefly before we have the programme Natural and Cultural Health Service. So our horticultural wellbeing group, GROW, with the volunteers, they were able to participate in that exhibition. So they were able to work with the Lucian Day Foundation, look through things we had in the collection, select things that were going to be within the exhibition. They also got the opportunity to make their own prints, basically, in the same way, and just spent a lot of time with the foundation and to find out more about Lucian Day. And we had items of her gardening items. I don't know if many people know, but she was a huge gardener, Lucian Day. And so we had elements, her gardening gloves and apron and things like that within the collection. So there's a really good synergy with the people, the participants we work with, to have an opportunity to engage with our collections, engage with the artists. So that's one example. And then we can be another day doing something completely different. So I think it probably would have been my first or second year in Manchester. Every year we have an event, the Manchester Flower Show. So in that year we ended up doing an installation using our wallpapers from the collection with botanical and environmental themes, and also using live plants, which the groups who were part of Growing Everything had been part of working on. So there's so many different ways. Could be an installation somewhere, an exhibition, and that's the beauty of it. I think that's why I love my role so much, because every day is a different day, but I get to work with almost every element within the gallery, every team, every person. So yeah.
It sounds like an ideal role, really.
I'm not complaining.
Thanks so much, Francine. And then coming to you, Daisy, as you've already sort of briefly talked about, as an artist, your influences are broader than nature alone. You also work a lot with technology and design, and you work on commissions outside the traditional gallery sphere. I'd be interested to know how you approach your work differently depending on the environment that the work will be in, and who you're working with as well, whether it's scientists, designers, and so on.
Yeah, I love a complex project. So, I mean, I don't come from a traditional fine art background. My background was actually in architecture and through design. So there's something for me about the deliciousness of collaborating with as many experts as possible and getting to ask them lots of questions. So my focus really is on our relationship with the natural world. And I use technology as a way to sort of highlight this paradox of how much we value the new rather than preserve what already exists. So often there's an irony within the project. So recreating the Dawn Chorus using machine learning required collaborating with a string theory physicist and sound archives, nature sound archives around the world, trying to piece this together and working with sound recordists like Chris Watson to try and actually figure out how to solve this problem. And in the process of making these projects, in a way, we're doing new research. So the collaboration with Eden is really the first time I've moved completely outside the gallery, and that was so exciting and really inspired the project. So the competition brief asked for an artwork about pollinators, and I said, oh, this is such a good opportunity to make something for pollinators and really experiment with what it means to fabricate an artwork out of living plants. And it's a permanent installation, and what does that mean, and can I work with all of Eden's experts, and who else can we bring in? So this project becomes this enormous vehicle to bring people together. And that's something that really excites me about my practice, and just being able to ask people all these questions. But it's also about using it as an opportunity to question what is an artwork and who is it for. And for me, this the really sort of exciting part as well about working with Eden is it's a completely different audience, and doing this online as well. What kind of people will be playing with this website? People who may not be familiar with sort of AI art or algorithmic art, but are excited about gardening, and vice versa. So it's really, for me, a challenge to think about how can art be useful in the ecological crisis? Should it be useful? Can it be more than just a place for reflection? And can it, sort of in line with Eden's principles, which inspired me, can it be used to give us agency, to allow us to feel that we can do something rather than just feel this sense of panic and loss, which is what I experience every day.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Daisy. And Art Farm members in our audience will be pleased to know that they can read a little bit more about Daisy's work in our autumn issue of Art Quarterly, which also features some of her fantastic artwork on its cover, which you showed us earlier, Daisy. So that's something to look forward to coming through your letterboxes. So right now, environmental issues and climate change are pertinent conversations in our everyday life. We're encountering them, we're reminded of them on a daily basis. It would be fantastic to hear from all of you about how art can help prompt important conversations and bring forth meaningful engagement with these issues. So Emma, I'm going to come to you first. Perhaps you could kick off and tell us a bit about, or a bit more about, the General Ecology Network, which, as you kindly mentioned, we helped support you with a grant last year. Who's involved in the network, and what does it hope to achieve?
Thanks, Emma. Well, our vision for the network is really interdisciplinary, with art and ecology at its core. And we've come together as kind of art, science, institutions, systems thinkers, legal innovators to create this decentralized network. But I guess due to the impact of the pandemic on all of us and our lives, it's kind of the incubation period has been extended, and we've spent the past kind of 6 months drafting up a mission and interviewing different stakeholders, and we're about to, as COP emerges on the horizon or gets closer to us, we're starting to go public with that and convene some more kind of public events and occasions. And we really want to draw in as diverse a range of voices as possible. I guess there are 3 areas that we're interested in: artist-led systems change, and how do we learn from each other, and how can we embed methods of environmental kind of justice or responsibility within our institutions, and how do we assess that impact. And then a second element of what we want to do is kind of sector convening and bringing together methodologies. We're aware that there's lots of other people out there already doing these things, but how do we kind of learn from each other and come together? And thirdly, I guess, an idea of prototyping different approaches and thinking about very practical issues, like the fact that we can't really, or we shouldn't be traveling as much or transporting work as much, consuming as much. And so how do we create a more resilient and sustainable art field? Those are that's touching the surface.
No, that's really interesting, and obviously really timely conversations to be having. And I know there's a few sort of key core partners involved right now. Is that right? And then is the ambition that you'll be able to sort of act as a central point resource for the wider sector?
Absolutely, absolutely. So of course it's been ourselves, RBGE with Climate House and the Serpentine, and we've brought in moral imaginations and a kind of legal guru, visioner, ecological kind of and a number of other kind of quieter partners. We've consulted with the likes of Julie's Bicycle and Creative Carbon Scotland and the Scottish Contemporary Art Network. So all these people have been in the conversation just at the beginning, yeah.
Great. Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing the network develop. Misha, your work with Daisy and the pollinator project at Eden specifically addresses biodiversity decline. It would be great to hear more about your engagement with this topic and about the commissioning project with Daisy.
Yeah, so we put together a major cross-disciplinary collaborative campaign in response to new research around pollinator decline and restoration. The project spans educational programs, citizen science. We're doing active planting in order to look at restorational concepts. And it's generously supported by Garfield Weston Foundation. Daisy was then one of 3 artists that we approached and asked to develop a proposal and commissioned a proposal, working very collaboratively. So we asked her to come and visit our site, to meet our teams, you know, our horticultural teams, our science teams. My director of interpretation, Dr. Jo Elworthy, who is a phenomenal woman, kind of gave Daisy the whole lowdown on this research, and then she went away and developed a proposal. We then put together a panel of cultural influencers to look at those proposals, evaluate them, and decide who should be commissioned. So it was quite important to us to decentralise that decision making. They included Claire Lilly from Yorkshire Sculpture Park, Canada Gertler from Outset Art, thank you. Tim Smith, our founder, and also Joycelyn, who's one of the Grimshaw architects who built the actual original biomes. And Daisy's proposal just stood out completely on so many levels. It ticked every single box because we're, you know, Eden's as an institution, rather than necessarily being an arts institution, it's implicitly about environmental responsibility. Our whole policies and practices are built around how we can make the lowest carbon impact that we can make. And all of Daisy's considerations were looking at, you know, how can we localize the planting, and even more than that, how could this project, instead of just being kind of a passive project that talks about pollinator decline and restoration, how can we make it a project of activism so it has a positive impact? And then beyond that, how can we empower audiences to participate in this so that they don't just come and experience it, but they can do it themselves at home and be a part of it? And then even beyond that, something that really excited me, having looked a lot at digital art practices, and I was already really interested in everything Daisy had been doing with AI processes, but the fact that the actual piece itself is a physical, natural garden. So you go and experience this thing that it's, the technology is completely invisible, but actually behind it is this technological foundation that's enabled it to exist. So it kind of plays to this like incredibly innovative and forward-thinking processes, but you still have the experience of a physical installation that you walk around as a human being, and you have smells and scents and sight, and so that was part of why this was picked over everything else.
Sounds like an incredible project, and it's also really interesting to hear about that sort of democratic process of commissioning. Daisy, you've spoken a little bit about it, and obviously Misha's just filled us in, but I'd love to sort of hear your experience of undertaking this project, and also how you hope it's going to engage audiences with environmental issues, and how you as an artist, hope people will respond to it?
That's a lot of very good questions with some unknown answers. So I think, I mean, for me, it's the first time doing something like this, and each of my recent works since I finished my PhD about 3 or 4 years ago have been an experiment where trying and testing something new and don't know what the answer will be. And in a way, that's what this is. I'd proposed to the jury that there should be a website as well. It wasn't part of the original commission, and we were able to get more support from Google Arts and Culture and the Gaia Arts Foundation. And so this online element, in a way, is also has its problems, because you can generate your own garden, but not everyone has a garden to plant in. So there's pieces of the project that aren't yet in place, but we're hoping that once it launches, those pieces might start to come together. For example, how would you plant one as a community? Is there a community space where you could do this? Because you need a sizable plot. You could plant a 3 meter by 3 meter plot, but it's going to be a small pattern. So what are the mechanisms to actually enable that activism part? And that's an unanswered question. The enthusiasm for creating the further editions is actually really exciting. There's 2 in the pipeline, so in development. And one of them is international, and that's also part of the mechanism of the project, which, as I said, I love asking experts questions, and this means that each time we make one in a new region, we'll create collaboratively with a local institution abroad a new plant palette that's suitable for that region. And then that plant palette is donated back to the website as part of that institution's commission or private collective, but there's, even if it's a private commission, there's this act of generosity that's built into the project, which means that local users to that region can then create their own garden using locally appropriate plants. And that's quite challenging as an artist, persuading each new commissioner that there should be this research and development aspect, which is a large amount of work each time. But it's in a way, for me, different to what I see as a standard art model. There's no, Eden is the original commissioner, but we're creating a network of commissioners. That the joy is everyone coming together into this bigger network and being part of a long list, hopefully, of lots of amazing different kinds of arts institutions, botanical institutions, scientific research centers. So in a way, it's an experiment, and it's brilliant. All these people are supporting it so far, and I don't know what happens next, in a way. So I may be doing this for the next 10 years, which maybe not, but the technology behind it as well, to try and develop something like this. What is an algorithmic garden, and how do you create an algorithm that can maximize empathy? So when you speak to a horticulturalist or to a pollinator expert whose work is to stick little radio receivers on the backs of bumblebees, what does it mean to create a garden for pollinators that has nothing to do with how we like it to look? So these were all unknowns at the beginning. So the painting that you saw in the slides was the concept, and delivery will be, the proof will be in the pudding in a couple of months.
It's just such a fascinating concept, and really exciting to know that it will live on far beyond Eden Project as well. Really exciting. So Francine, I want to come to you. The Whitworth is a gallery driven by a mission to work with communities to use art for positive social change. And I know that you've got fantastic community programming at the gallery. How do you intersperse environmental issues with your programming and with the art on display?
Okay, I guess, using art for positive social change is, I guess, a way of us having a tool to initiate and have conversations with the community around specific themes as such. So maybe I can't speak specifically about maybe certain items within the collection, but for example, shows. So doing a show around that theme. So at the moment we have a show which began during Manchester International Festival, which is Cloud Studies and Forensic Architecture. And this show in particular, for example, talks a lot about environmental racism and themes. So it looks specifically at some areas, in particular an area in the United States, in Louisiana, where there's been a huge issue with kind of polluted air, which has ended up being termed that area is termed Cancer Alley, and it's predominantly a community that is resided by African Americans. So being able to do shows which focus on themes like this is really just a way for us to be able to prompt discussion within our civic engagement and education program, and start having these discussions with our communities about how such themes, I guess, affect them in their lives. So yeah, that's one way that we do it, and I guess it's a wonderful way, because to be able to, I guess, connect with different audiences, to be able to use the visual is obviously really, really important, and we can do that work from school groups to our adult audiences as well. So that's just one way in which we do that work.
Fantastic, thank you.
Francine, what was that show called?
It's called Forensic Architecture and Cloud Studies.
Sounds amazing.
It's on until October, so please do check it out.
Will do.
So to Misha and Emma and Francine, I want to put out a question. We know that young people are hugely keyed into issues around climate change and our environment. Is this something that you are noticing more in your projects and in your organisation's work with schools? I'm going to leave that open to whoever wants to go first. Emma.
I jump in. I'm just thinking we have not really been connecting with schools as much during the lockdown, but as we re-emerge from lockdown, one of the things that I've noticed, we've been recruiting for climate house assistants, kind of front of house and you know, entry-level positions for the gallery, and the overwhelming kind of interest in our new approach, and has been really heartening. You know, I wanted to give them all the job because they were so passionate and engaged with what we were doing and wanting to work with us, because this is at the forefront of their mind, and you know, I suppose it's one of the things behind Climate House is to kind of combat that climate anxiety that young people are experiencing, or many people are experiencing, but I think young people particularly, and that's only been kind of enhanced by the pandemic too. So that's one area that we have on the road to COP, if you like, been working with a group called Possible Dialogues, connecting youth leaders in the Amazon with young people in Scotland, and that's been a really interesting conversation and kind of eye-opening for many over here to hear how complex and difficult the experiences are of young people kind of protecting their environment.
Amazing.
So.
Thank you, Emma.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess with our work with young people, I guess we've noticed this in particular. So for the past few years, although albeit this year, we've done a lot of work with the RHS, and particularly around their schools gardening project. So we'll have an event where schools all across the Northwest will come, and it's all about them leading to create their own gardens at the RHS Tatton Park show, for example. And so we do notice a lot through that kind of activity in the discussions. Obviously, the children are thinking very much about how to make gardens sustainable, and looking at the climate in that way, and how to create climate-friendly gardens. So we've definitely seen an interest in that over the past few years. And also, I guess, our work that we do with young people aged 16 to 25, we have a program which we call Park Pioneers, and that's very much about young people within that age group who may very well have an interest in the outdoor arts, and whether that is live art or whether that's staging events, you name it. And so we've done a program around that, and within that program we do build in talking about sustainability and thinking about the climate, and how to go on to put such events or installations or these happenings, but thinking about the environment in mind and having less impact, basically. So yeah, the young people are definitely focused on this. And I think if you ask them, that will be top of the list out of most of their concerns.
Misha, would you say that that's sort of the same experience for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can't speak to the educational programme because that's run by a different department, led by my phenomenal colleague, Sam Kendall. But in terms of what I do, we've run a few programmes trying to support projects for graduate artists, specifically graduate artists from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And there's been a very clear shift in terms of subjectivity towards climate and ecology. Way more than when I graduated art school. So it's definitely in the forefront of young people's minds, as much as I could say that. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Just a reminder to everybody that to pop your questions in the Q&A if there's anything in particular you'd like to ask the panel. Before we go to those questions, I'd like to chat a little bit about nature and well-being. So the past 18 months have put conversations about, well-being and mental health at the forefront, and the benefits of spending time amongst nature are widely acknowledged. And from Art Fund's own research, we also know that lots of people visit museums and galleries to de-stress and unwind. So in one last sort of quick fire question to all of you before we go to the audience, could you share one moment or experience that you've had of art and nature overlapping, where you have felt or seen the benefits to yourself or to others? And I'm going to come to you first, Francine, because I know you do an amazing amount with well-being at the Whitworth.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, straight away, the example that comes to my mind is actually designing and creating a garden at the Whitworth. So when we had the redevelopment and created the art garden, that process, because we reopened first before we created the garden. So participants from the Horticultural Wellbeing Project Grow were part of the team who helped to create the garden that's there. And I mean, I'm a huge gardener, keen horticulturalist, but I would say that designing a garden, creating a garden, I think even Daisy touched on it before, is an art form. It's a complete art form doing that. And so actually working with the group to see them create a garden, get those skills, and to see the finished product and to see the public and visitors enjoying that finished product, like, it's been absolutely amazing. And it transformed people's lives within that project who were on it, just to feel like they have new skills, but also the pride in creating something that's beautiful and enjoyed by lots, and to create something that's living, to come back and see the positive impact that they've had in giving life to a space and to plants and things. So yeah, for me firsthand, it's definitely about creating gardens with people.
That's really, really wonderful. Thank you. Does anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah. Oh, I think I'll draw from this weekend when we opened Christine's show, and she had hoped to plant flax in the Botanics last year and had all this seed, and did a call out on Instagram for anybody who would be willing to take some seed and plant it. So 37 growers across the UK, from Orkney to Weymouth, got enough seed to plant a metre square. And then she created a kind of WhatsApp group, and they shared their stories as the plant grew. Flax grows, it takes 100 days from seed to harvest. And at the weekend when we opened the exhibition, some of those growers were able to come, and they'd never met before. They'd only met through WhatsApp, and just hearing their responses and the kind of sharing that they had and the experience and how they're continuing to grow. And one of them brought a friend who then went and bought 5 packets of flaxseed from our shop because she was so excited by the project. So definitely, yeah, that's a positive experience.
Fantastic. Daisy.
I was thinking of last summer, I started volunteering in a local charity-run walled garden, which grows vegetables and normally runs workshops for example, kids with autism, and obviously wasn't able to do that with the pandemic. So we were just maintaining it. And I was between Zoom calls working on this with, speaking to Eden's horticulturalists. There I was the absolute beginner in this garden, sat in front of a pollinator flower bed with a book, trying to work out what was a weed and what wasn't a weed. So in this very strange moment where I was actually able to be outside and working with plants as a beginner, and then nipping back next door to be on Zoom and try and pretend I knew what I was talking about. So that was a good moment of well-being last year.
Amazing. And Misha, I mean, you've got such an incredible environment at the Eden Project. Yeah, love to hear from you on how you sort of see that impact on people's well-being.
I mean, I think it's never been more acutely apparent than in lockdown, when all of our, we have a social prescribing program called Nature's Way, and that got completely put on pause because we couldn't safely physically do it. So Nature's Way is all about, people suffering from mental health challenges or social isolation, or there's a whole program specifically put together around various different respiratory diseases. They're actually prescribed by their GP to come to Eden and join a walking group. So we do walking groups. We also have a program called Deep Roots New Shoots, which connects grandparents who are their primary carers for their grandchildren to get together. They come to Eden. We do arts activities with them. And so all these programs had to suddenly shut down. And that made us just feel like we're completely letting this community down that relies on the Eden Project almost as a chapel for that area to come together and feel connected. And yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that it's completely critical to mental health and well-being, both arts and culture.
And it must be so amazing to be able to open up again and offer that opportunity to everybody.
Definitely.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. I'm going to go to some questions from the audience. So this one here from Penny. Since we've sadly been made aware of the horrific impact of climate change in the last few years, have any of you noticed obvious signs of alteration in your gardens, in certain plants, growth, vegetations, and so on? Are you starting to see that impact?
Shall I say, I don't know, I can speak to what I learned from our horticulturists in the Botanics, and great. How flowering seasons are definitely changing for us. And we're kind of famous for having an extraordinary collection of rhododendrons, many that are endangered and some of which are extinct in the wild. And they have this flowering season usually from kind of March to the end of May, but they're flowering earlier and earlier, and often they get caught in a kind of snap frost. But this is when the rhododendrons start blooming in February. There's this kind of around the garden that's an indicator of climate, one of the first indicators. But there are many within the garden. If you talk to any of our horticulturists, the way the trees are, yes, they can read the garden in a completely different way, and I learn from them every day if I stop and ask what's going on. So I think if you know what you're looking for, it's quite apparent.
Yeah. And Francine, is it similar with the gardens at the Hayworth and the gardeners there?
I'm just trying to think maybe of particular species of things that we notice. I mean, Manchester's always very wet anyway, so when it becomes even wetter, we know that that's part of climate change. I think that is something we will start to keep our eye out for now and be as part of our discussions and I guess the programs. We've been building a new community garden within Whitworth Park so that we're able to expand the amount of people that we're able to work with. and engage the community more about improving biodiversity within the park. So I think that's what we will be looking at now, to see if even in the most kind of native of species that we have within the park and within our gardens, if we can start to detect change. But like Emma said, yeah, if you know anything about horticulture, you know that the signs are already there. So I think for us, it's about sharing these signs and the education with our community so that they can become aware of the signs as well and look out for it and find out what they can also do really to help play their part.
I've just to add to Francine's, I was just thinking that we have an area in the garden that's called the rain garden, where the horticulturists have planted plants that will help combat the kind of flooding, and they're all Scottish kind of native plants that are grown there to. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had terrible flash floods in Edinburgh, and I think just about the launch of the art festival, every arts organisation was kind of bailing out water, and the gardens included. We had really bad floods, so that's another indicator.
Yeah. Just to go to another question from the audience, does local geography play a part in the artworks you choose or in your artistic practice? I know, Daisy, you were speaking earlier particularly about the Pollinator project and taking it international. Maybe this is one for you to kick off with.
That's a really good question. I think certainly for this project, so the question is, will the algorithm work for completely different pollinators and planting palettes? So the palette that we've created now will probably be fine for Atlantic Europe, so Belgium, Netherlands, Northern France, where the pollinators are quite similar. And as we go further south and east across Europe, we will be creating very different lists. And part of the excitement of that process is working with local experts and partnering with local experts so that we're not coming in as a colonial garden force. But then in other works as well, so I mentioned a project called Resurrecting the Sublime, where we use DNA from pressed flower specimens that, from archives, so extinct flowers held in the Harvard Herbarium. And each of those 3 flowers that we chose, one was from Hawaii, one from Cape Town, and one from Ohio in the US. And each one has its own story, and it's something that we've been really delving into. And we're actually working on a podcast about one of them, which came from Cape Town and went extinct and was last seen in 1805, but it was seen in London in a collector's garden. So we're exploring that through a decolonial perspective as well. So the projects I do are very much rooted in place. But then there's this strange thing where you put them in a gallery and they become isolated and boxed away, and that's actually something that I play with in the work, is sort of using the atmosphere of the diorama or that kind of installation typology to show, locations put out of place, and this strange disconnect that we have between, even with plants, that we see a plant and we label it and name it, but it often doesn't live without its natural habitat. So the 3 flowers that we worked on for Resurrecting the Sublime, each went extinct because its local habitat was destroyed by colonial action. So, and they each grew in a very specific place, specific soil and climate.
Yes, that sounds like an incredibly interesting project. And Misha and Emma, I'd be interested to know in terms of your sort of commissioning of artworks, to what extent local geography plays a part.
First, Emma.
Okay. Well, I guess the Christine's show is interesting because flax has been grown in Scotland, but it's emerged. It's from elsewhere, and so it can sometimes. But we're, as a botanic garden, prior to the pandemic, we were working on conservation projects in 36 countries around the world. And one of the things I'm really keen to do is bring those voices and those communities into our work. And so kind of share that global network, if you like. And therefore, those places will be important, but yeah, less. I mean, you can see behind me, we have this constellation of plants that are out of place to work with. So telling that story is really important. Yeah, Misha.
I mean, yes, without a doubt, especially with the international projects, I think each site looks at the location as and is idiosyncratic and responsive to that location. So some are, I mean, like the Eden Project Cornwall was a restoration project in itself, because we took over a completely sterile clay mine and turned that into a biodiverse habitat. And that biodiverse habitat does take considerations around kind of native invasive cultivar species and what makes most sense. And is probably, you know, Eden's not a physic garden. It's not a botanical garden in the traditional sense. So it is far more about culture and institution. So it looks both at natural geography, but also social geography. And again, through our cultural programs, our artistic programs, it's about kind of looking at the grassroots culture that exists where we are, and in a very similar parallel to the plant species that we're looking to grow and create more biodiversity. We're looking to, you know, empower, enable, and build opportunities for people, creatives, artists, in each location that we're working in. While also, I mean, Daisy and I don't know, I'm going off on a tangent around parallels, but we talked a lot about native invasive and cultivar because it's a grey area, and it's a highly debated topic, because where do you draw the line between what's native, what's invasive? Is it the Roman era? Like, it's not a clear-cut thing. And culturally, similarly, it's really important for us to both look at growing and empowering and providing opportunity and platform for grassroots creatives, but working in that area, but also how do we, you know, Eden's in an area of incredibly low social provision. There isn't another arts institution for more than an hour in each direction. It's very social economically deprived. So how do we provide a world-class cultural provision for that community? And that's not just about just putting on shows with local creatives. It's also about bringing in world-class artists who are doing things like, you know, the Venice Biennale, artists like Daisy, and showing them in this part of Cornwall.
Thank you so much. We are rapidly running out of time, and there's some fantastic questions coming in. I'm so sorry if I've not got to yours, but I just wanted to end on this one from Rachel. She says, I'm interested in how you all keep your ecological/outdoor programs running through the winter. How do you adapt to these extensive periods where Mother Nature rests until spring, especially during this time when many people experience seasonal affective disorder and may need art and nature more than ever? I wonder if any of you can just really briefly comment on that.
I'll try to start. Okay, so as I said before, we're in Manchester, so we're used to having quite dismal weather a lot of the time. And I think for us, I mean, you'll see we have a strapline, and a lot of our activities, it's whatever the weather. So for us, it's about, you know, that age-old saying of, oh, well, it's not what you, it's about the clothes that you wear outside. You know that thing about wearing appropriate stuff. There's never bad weather. It's just about being dressed appropriately. So I think for us, we, for example, within the horticultural wellbeing program, we still do stuff when technically the garden season is shut down. So we will still meet, we'll still discuss, we'll still plan for what we want to plant for the season ahead, and look at things within the collection and indoors that kind of have that botanical theme. So there's always something to do. And as well, it's about the nature and art and nature together. We can still draw on themes of nature whilst doing activities that are more artistic, drawing and so forth and things like that. So the environment is always at the heart, and nature at the heart of everything that we do, and we just mix it up for Manchester weather really, so it never stops.
Yeah. Fantastic. I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap it up there. I feel like we could carry on talking for ages, but that is all that we have time for. So thank you so much to Francine, Daisy, Misha and Emma for tonight's fascinating discussion. And thank you everybody for joining us this evening. I hope that you've enjoyed hearing more about these amazing places and the projects that you are helping us to support. This event was part of our programme for art partners, who are Art Fund's closest supporters and are at the heart of the grants that we give to museums and galleries. If you'd like to know more about becoming an art partner and joining more of their brilliant events that take you behind the scenes of museums and galleries, then please do visit the Art Fund website, artfund.org/artpartners, or get in touch with the team. And thank you once again to our speakers. Goodbye and have a wonderful evening.